Welcome to Life Stories, where real-life experiences unfold with every story. Today, we dive into a powerful journey of family, self-discovery, and the pursuit of self-respect. In this tale, Maya, a young woman caught in the shadows of her successful sister, learns that true strength lies not in seeking approval, but in standing up for herself. This is a story of taking control, finding your voice, and realizing that sometimes, the hardest choices lead to the greatest freedom. Join us as we begin this journey today. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories to stay connected and hear more. It was a warm evening in July when I drove up to my parents' house for summer break after 3 years of college. The drive had become familiar, almost predictable. The large oak tree that stood guard over our front yard, the old wooden fence that my dad always promised to fix but never did, and the mailbox where my mom would leave notes that always seemed to contain the same words. "Come home, darling. We miss you." I knew what to expect. Mom's over-enthusiastic hugs, Dad's awkward pats on the back, and the endless questions about my studies that never quite masked their disinterest. After all, I wasn't the one who had made a name for myself. That honor belonged to Jessica, my older sister, the golden child in our family. She was the one they were always proud of, the one they fawned over. And I was just Maya, there. But not really there. "Hey, Maya. Honey," Mom called from the porch. "You're just in time for dinner." And guess who's coming over? I didn't need to guess. It was always the same. Jessica. Of course. And her husband, Tom. They made it their habit to drop by whenever I was home, as though they needed to remind everyone of their success story. Sure enough, 2 hours later, we were all seated around the dining table. Mom had pulled out the special occasion tablecloth, the one with the delicate lace trim that only saw daylight when Jessica visited. "So," Jessica announced, setting down her fork with that theatrical flair she'd perfected over the years, "Tom and I have been thinking, we should all go to Hawaii for Christmas." Mom literally clapped her hands, her eyes lighting up like a child's. "Oh, that would be wonderful," Dad beamed with pride. "What a fantastic idea, sweetheart." And then, as if on cue, Jessica turned to me. That mocking smile was already playing on her lips. And I knew what was coming. "Maya, do you think you can afford it? Or should big sister help you out?" My cheeks burned, but I kept my voice steady. "I can manage my own expenses." "Thanks." Jessica raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" "We're looking at about $3,000 per person for flights and hotels." $3,000. That was more than all my savings combined. I was only making minimum wage at my part-time jobs, and I had barely enough to cover my textbooks and rent. But the last thing I wanted was for Jessica to think I needed her charity. So I swallowed the sting of embarrassment and repeated firmly, "I'll manage." She shrugged and turned back to Mom and Dad, continuing her tale of their latest achievements. "Anyway, the restaurant is doing amazing. We just hired a new chef from Italy. Can you believe it? Authentic Italian cuisine right here in our town." Mom, her voice dripping with admiration, said, "You're so entrepreneurial. Dear Maya, you should really take notes from your sister about business sense." My stomach twisted, but I stayed quiet. "Yeah, Maya," Jessica added, her tone laced with sarcasm. "Maybe you could even work for me someday." Sitting at that dinner table, watching my parents fawn over Jessica's Hawaii plans, I felt like I was 10 again. Nothing had changed. The same eager nods from Mom, the same proud smile on Dad's face, the same feeling of being invisible. Jessica was still their golden child, just as she had been since we were kids. 5 years between us might as well have been 50 for all the difference it made in how our parents saw us. They never said it outright, but their actions spoke volumes. Jennifer was the one they believed in. She was the one they were sure would make something of herself. And as for me, I was just Maya, The girl who was always there. But not really. They weren't cruel about it. They never deliberately hurt me. But sometimes. It felt like I wasn't even part of the family. Like I was a background character in the Jennifer show. They would remember to ask about my grades or if I needed anything. But their eyes would always drift back to Jessica, waiting for her next achievement to celebrate. I was still that little girl who used to shrink under the weight of their expectations. Still the one who watched from the sidelines as Jessica's every move was lauded. Still the one who found herself in the shadows of a family who only seemed to notice her when it was convenient for them. But there was one person who always seemed to have enough love for both of us. Grandpa Joe. He lived in the big old house on Maple Street, with its wraparound porch and creaky swing. He was the one who never treated me as if I were invisible. When Grandpa promised to pay for both Jessica's and my college educations, it felt like a lifeline. It was the one thing that made me feel like I mattered. When Jessica left for college, I was 13. I thought things would finally change. Finally, I get my turn to be the daughter in the spotlight. But, as usual, I was wrong. Jessica's triumphs were still the only ones that mattered. Mom would burst into my room, practically vibrating with excitement, whenever she had news of Jessica's latest achievement. Guess what? She joined the debate team. We should drive up to see her this weekend, and Dad, always the proud father, would suggest we can take her some money for expenses. They spent hours on Skype with Jessica, the laptop perched on the kitchen counter while they cooked dinner. Her voice filled our house even when she wasn't there. And meanwhile, I would slip out the back door and head to Grandpa's house. Those afternoons at Grandpa's became my sanctuary. They were the only moments in my life that ever felt like home. Grandpa had a way of making me feel seen. Without making a big production out of it, we'd settle into his worn leather couch, a tub of mint chocolate chip ice cream between us, and watch old movies on his ancient TV. You know what's great about Casablanca, Maya? He'd say, pausing the movie. It's not about the obvious hero. It's about the quiet one who does the right thing when nobody's watching. It was these quiet, simple moments that mattered. Not the big, showy ones where everyone had to perform. Grandpa taught me the value of doing what's right even when no one noticed. And when I spent afternoons fishing with him at the lake behind his house, he'd remind me, the best fish aren't always the ones making the biggest splash. Sometimes, it's the quiet ones swimming deep that turn out to be the most special. I started to think that maybe I didn't need to be the golden child to be loved. Maybe I didn't need to be noticed by everyone to matter. It was the quiet, simple moments with Grandpa that made me feel truly seen. And for the first time, I wondered if I could find my own path without needing to compete with Jessica. 5 years passed. And as they always did, life moved forward in a blur. Jessica's accomplishments continued to shine in the spotlight of our parents' attention. She graduated college with honors, secured a prestigious job at a firm that everyone seemed to admire, and quickly started dating Tom, a man who was perfect in every way, at least according to our parents. They loved Tom from the moment they met him. He was everything they could have hoped for: successful, charming, and seemingly devoted to Jessica. Meanwhile, I was preparing for my own college journey, uncertain about what my future held. The day I left for college, Grandpa hugged me tighter than he ever had before. His embrace felt different somehow, more urgent, more final. "I love you so much, Maya," he whispered in my ear. Never forget that. At the time, I laughed it off, trying to brush aside the strange weight his words carried. "Grandpa, you're acting like we'll never see each other again." "I'll be home for Thanksgiving." He smiled that gentle, reassuring smile of his and patted my cheek. "Just remember what I said, kiddo." I didn't fully understand then, but I would later. 2 months into my freshman year, I received the news that Grandpa had died in his sleep. My heart sank as I sat there in my dorm room, phone pressed to my ear, unable to process the weight of her words. The world felt like it stopped spinning for a moment, and I couldn't grasp the reality of it. "Grandpa, The one person who always made me feel special was gone. The funeral was a cold, crisp morning in November. We gathered in the attorney's office for the reading of the will. Jessica sat primly in her designer black dress, while I fidgeted in a scratchy department store dress I had bought last minute. I couldn't help but notice how effortlessly Jessica seemed to command attention. Her posture immaculate, her composure unshakable. To my daughter, Sarah, the attorney read, I leave the sum of $50,000. Mom squeezed Dad's hand as she nodded. She looked relieved, happy that Jessica was taken care of. To my granddaughter, Jessica, the attorney continued, I leave the sum of $300,000. Jessica's face lit up, and she immediately turned to Tom, who had been hovering by her side throughout the funeral. She beamed. Baby, we can have that dream wedding now and still have enough to start our restaurant. I looked down at the floor, heart heavy. There was no mention of me. Not a single word. And to my granddaughter, Maya, the attorney went on, I leave my house on Maple Street, including all its contents and the surrounding property. For a moment, the room was silent. The weight of the words hung in the air. And then Jessica burst out laughing. Oh my God. Maya got the old house. That's hilarious. She wiped away the tears of mirth from her eyes and turned to Tom. Don't worry, sis. Maybe you can sell it and buy yourself something nice. Though I doubt anyone would want that creaky old place. Mom scolded her half-heartedly. But she was already smiling at Jessica's plans for the future. We'll have the wedding in spring, Jessica announced, as though it were an order. Tom and I already have the perfect business plan for an authentic Italian restaurant. This is exactly the capital we needed. It was as though my inheritance didn't even matter. The house, the one thing I had been left, was nothing more than a joke to them. A punchline in Jessica's grand plan. It was no surprise when she and Tom moved in shortly after, assuming I'd simply let them live there rent-free. After all, they were family, and I was nothing more than the backdrop to their story. The extra player in a game I never had the chance to truly enter. The house was more than just property to me. It was the one piece of connection I had left to Grandpa. The one place where his memory lived. To them, it was just an old house. To me, it was a sanctuary. A link to a time when I had felt seen. When I had mattered. When I asked if they'd be willing to pay rent, they looked at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. It didn't make sense to them. Of course, they wouldn't pay rent, it was family after all. And so, I swallowed my frustration and allowed them to move in. But every time I came home, I felt like a stranger in my own house. Jessica had replaced Grandpa's old leather chair with some modern monstrosity. His beloved fishing photos were taken down to make room for framed reviews of their restaurant. And their wedding photo sat on the mantel where Grandpa had once kept our chess set. It was the subtle shifts, the little changes, that hurt the most. They made me realize just how little I was seen. How easily they dismissed my feelings and took what was rightfully mine. And all the while, I stayed quiet. I kept my protests to myself. Afraid of the fallout. Afraid of what would happen if I stood up for myself. But deep down, the resentment began to build. And I started to question everything I had been taught about family. It was during those long months, living under the same roof as Jessica and Tom, that I began to question the very foundation of my relationship with my family. Their treatment of me, their disregard for my feelings and needs, had been building for years. But now, in this small space, it was becoming unbearable. I had always quietly accepted my position, convinced that family loyalty meant keeping my silence, keeping the peace. But now, with the house that Grandpa had left me being turned into a mere extension of Jessica and Tom's dreams, I felt like something inside me was slowly dying. The turning point came one cold evening in November, just before Thanksgiving. I had been working double shifts at the campus cafe, picking up extra hours at the library, all while struggling to make ends meet. I was determined to save every penny I could. I had decided to go to Hawaii with my family. Maybe, just maybe, it would be the moment they finally saw me. The moment I finally felt like I was part of something that mattered. It wasn't just about the vacation, it was about proving to them that I could be part of the family's plans. I wanted to show them that I could keep up. That I wasn't some invisible shadow in their world. So, when Jessica called late one night in November and told me to send the $3,000 for the trip, I didn't hesitate. I transferred the money immediately. My hands were shaking with excitement as I clicked send on the banking app. This was it. I was going to be part of their world. But when I showed up at my parents' house on December 23rd, suitcase in hand, ready for the trip, something felt off. Mom barely met my eyes when she hugged me. And Dad kept clearing his throat, as if he were uncomfortable. I brushed it aside, chalking it up to pre-holiday stress. Maybe I was reading too much into things. Then, Jessica and Tom arrived. And everything changed. I could tell by the look on Jessica's face that something was wrong. She had that look again, the one she always wore when she was about to deliver bad news. And sure enough, as we sat down to dinner, she set down her wine glass and cleared her throat. "We need to discuss something," she announced, her voice dripping with false regret. "The restaurant's hit a rough patch. The numbers aren't what we projected." Mom reached over and squeezed her hand, offering her support. "I know," Jessica continued. "We've had to make some tough decisions. One of them is cutting our contribution to the Hawaii trip budget." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "But I've already paid my share," I managed to say, my voice shaking. "Well, Maya." Jessica smiled, that condescending smile I knew all too well. "That money will help cover the rest of our expenses. We couldn't possibly cancel on everyone now. And Tom and I never even had a proper honeymoon, because we went straight into the restaurant business." The room began to spin. My mind raced as I tried to process what was happening. They were taking my money. They were going to Hawaii with my savings. And I wasn't even going to be a part of it. I looked to Mom and Dad, hoping they would say something. Anything. To stop this insanity. But they just sat there. Mom, still patting Jessica's hand as though nothing was wrong. And Dad, studying his plate as if it held the secrets of the universe. I said it again, my voice barely above a whisper. "I paid my share. $3,000, that's all my savings." Mom snapped at me. "Family helps family. Maya, you know this. Jennifer and Tom are struggling with the restaurant. And the least you can do is be understanding." Understanding? My head swam with the unfairness of it all. I had worked tirelessly to save every penny. And now, my family was taking it from me with the excuse of family helping family. I had sacrificed so much. And all I had to show for it was this, being told I was selfish for wanting to keep what was rightfully mine. I stood up so abruptly that my chair scraped against the floor. The silence that followed was deafening. No one looked up. No one even seemed to care. I climbed the stairs to my old bedroom, the sounds of their cheerful conversation floating up behind me like an eerie echo. Lying in my childhood bed that night, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars Grandpa had helped me stick on the ceiling years ago, I made a decision. A decision that would change everything. The next morning, I played my part perfectly. I stood on the front porch, smiling and waving as they loaded their luggage into 2 waiting taxis. "Don't forget to water Mom's plants," Jessica called out, adjusting her designer sunglasses. "And check the mail every day," Mom added. I assured them, still smiling, that everything would be fine. "Don't worry about a thing." As the taxis disappeared around the corner, I walked to my car. This wasn't going to be another summer where I just accepted my place in the background. I had a plan. I drove straight to Grandpa's house. Tom and Jessica's belongings were everywhere. Her clothes filled the closets where Grandpa's old suits once hung. His beloved fishing photos were replaced by pretentious art. And their wedding photo sat on the mantel where Grandpa had once kept our chess set. They had taken over my inheritance without a second thought. as if it were theirs to claim. But no more. I started packing, methodically pulling out their things. Designer clothes, expensive shoes, custom-made suits, into boxes and bags they went. I found their important documents in Grandpa's old study and packed those too. I wasn't just reclaiming the house. I was reclaiming my life. I wasn't going to be their doormat anymore. Next, I called a moving company. The service was pricey, especially on Christmas Eve. But I didn't care. I watched with satisfaction as they packed up the last of Jessica and Tom's belongings. Then I went to a 24-hour locksmith and had every lock changed. For the first time in my life, I felt a sense of power, a sense of control over my own future. This was my inheritance. It was mine to decide what to do with, and I was no longer going to let them take what was rightfully mine. I drove back to campus that night, arriving just as my friends were starting their orphan Christmas celebration. Our little holiday gathering for students who couldn't, or didn't want to, go home. As I walked into the room, my friend Lisa looked up, her eyes wide. "Maya, I thought you'd be in Hawaii by now," I smiled, accepting a cup of hot chocolate from her. "Change of plans," I said. "But you know what? I think I'm exactly where I need to be. A year has passed since that Christmas, and I've come a long way. My relationship with my family hasn't mended, nor am I certain it ever will. But for the first time in my life, I no longer feel the need for their approval. The anger and frustration I once felt have slowly faded, replaced by something far more powerful, self-respect. Jessica and Tom's restaurant, the one they were so certain would thrive, has since closed. I hear things through the family grapevine. They're still living with my parents, regrouping, planning their next venture. As for me, I've found peace in the choices I've made. The tenants I rented Grandpa's house to pay for taxes, and I've even been able to build a small savings account. It's not much, but it's enough. I've learned that family isn't about who gets the most attention, who has the loudest successes, or who is the most celebrated. Sometimes, it's about quietly standing firm, setting boundaries, and knowing your own worth. My inheritance wasn't just money or property, it was a lesson in taking control of my own story, no longer letting others define my place in it. And while I wonder if things will ever be truly reconciled, I've come to realize that it doesn't matter. What matters is that I have finally learned to love myself, to respect myself, and to trust that I'm enough on my own. I'm no longer the background character in their lives. I am the author of my own. If you've enjoyed this story and want to hear more life-changing experiences, don't forget to hit the subscribe button to stay updated with our latest videos.